Hi, this is the Cat's Library. I'll be your librarian today. This month, I'm doing the Mermaid Challenge, where I'm going to draw a mermaid every day for the month. Engage speed paint. Salmon is currently in his early 20s, though he grew up in a salmon merfolk school. They were nomadic, moving between the ocean and the river. This particular school had certain beliefs about how the Merpeople should return to the ancient ways. They thought that they should draw energy from their spirit creature, being the salmon, which meant that they would run from more predatory-based merfolk and attack merfolk like krill, which are salmon's natural prey. It meant that they slept outside and dressed in woven seaweed. Everyone in the school was named Salmon, even if they had other names before joining. They all changed their name to Salmon, except their leader, who was Lenny the Great and Powerful. You had to say Lenny the Great and Powerful. There was a girl who called him Lenny the Great once and left out the "and powerful," and Salmon still has no idea where she went or if she was even real. Salmon was always decent enough at following the rules. In fact, there wasn't any serious offense that he'd ever committed. It was just that he always had this attitude whenever he needed to follow the rules. This attitude where he thought that what he was being asked to do was dumb, and the person in authority was also dumb. But you couldn't prove that that was what was going on because he was technically saying and doing all the right things. Not necessarily to perfection, but just well enough not to get in trouble. He loved to chat with people, and on the rare occasion that he did get in trouble, it was because he got lost in conversation when he should have been working or studying. Or he had convinced a group of kids to play that game where you grab a rock, swim up to the surface, drop the rock at the same elevation, and then race the rocks to see which one reaches the ocean floor the fastest. He was in a perpetual state of boredom, accented with moments of excitement and joy that were swiftly dashed by the endless maintenance of living in the wilds. That was until one day someone needed to go to the city to get supplies. Mostly medical supplies, since even though they were mostly self-sufficient and one with nature, most of the school threatened to quit if they didn't have a somewhat civilized take on sickness and injury. Lenny wanted to stay purely natural, but he didn't want to lose followers, and so agreed to their terms. Almost as if he didn't fully believe what he was preaching or something. Anyway, Salmon volunteered to go into town, and as he had recently turned 21 and had a mostly clean record, Lenny the Great and Powerful approved. The city was absolutely amazing, with its shops and people and random music playing and buildings and people. He was technically with an older adult, but he saw a pretty girl and found a way to break away to follow her. He woke up the next morning in a random unknown alley with a hangover, wearing a band t-shirt, way too many bead necklaces, and a pineapple on his head. It was the most alive that he had felt in his entire life. Orca grew up in the capital, and as a more predatory-based merperson, she was taught to fight at a young age. Before the age of 13, it was far from a formalized affair, and at Orca's peer group, many just did it because their parents made them. They didn't have a passion for it, or they didn't respect their culture. There weren't real weapons, and it was padded everywhere and sort of ridiculous. But Orca took to it as if it was the most serious thing in the world. Both of her parents were on the city guard. She had only ever seen her dad laugh once. Her mom had a deadpan and dark sense of humor and laughed a little bit more than her dad. Orca kept forgetting that she was capable of laughing. They were strict and judgmental but kind people, and they had a strict and judgmental but kind daughter. When Orca turned 13, she took her evaluation test and joined the junior guard. The training got significantly harder year after year. However, Orca rose to meet every goal. Despite being surrounded by people her age, she never made any close friends. Either they were jealous of her, or she couldn't socialize with them on their levels. They committed childish pranks against each other and told jokes and stories on their downtime. Orca didn't really do feelings or humor well, and training and fighting and protecting the innocent were the only things she really thought about. People secretly expected that when she got to the public relations classes, then that was where she would fail, but she surprised everyone by being very good at public relations. She picked up how to talk to the press and how to be assertive yet polite to civilians surprisingly fast. She studied the laws that she would eventually need to enforce, and then learned even more to the point that she probably could have passed the bar to be a lawyer if that's what she wanted for herself. Besides having issues connecting with her peers, another problem she had was thinking outside the box. She would memorize the rules and whatever successful guards had done in similar situations in the past, but for every test where it was a unique situation where she had to think on her feet, she panicked. Her teachers were still very supportive that she just needed more experience with different situations. It was actually very rare for a junior officer to become a captain immediately after graduating. Orca's mom had done it, at 17 years old no less. Her dad had made captain a year after he graduated because he disarmed a human bomb that terrorists had smuggled into the city. Orca had a lot to live up to. She graduated with a normal officer title. She was at the top of her class, but still not a captain. It was a weird feeling, and so she buried herself in her work in order to make the world make sense again. One day she was working on a case and she interviewed Salmon as a witness. He had been to a party where there had been an attempted murder, where the victim had to be hospitalized with a coma. The victim was also robbed. Most importantly, he had been possibly in possession of the Caracle Tear Diamond at the time of the attack, which was missing. As she worked on the case, Salmon somehow was at almost every important location, and she ended up interviewing him a lot. Neither of them were very happy about this at first, but they slowly and reluctantly became friends as the case went on. The victim of Orca's case was a bottlenose dolphin merman named Kevin Hurricane. He lived in a mansion uptown. The Hurricanes were an influential family in the capital city because they owned the Hurricane Trench, which was used for mining various materials. At the deepest point of the trench were diamonds. And about 100 years ago, the Caracle Tear Diamond was unearthed by miners and donated to the Royal Museum by the Hurricane family. It was just called the Royal Museum because it was started by the royal family, but it was still available to the public. It wasn't clear how Kevin got a hold of the diamond at the time of the mugging. What Salmon explained in this interview was that Kevin worked in the family company as a higher-up, but it was his dad who was actually in charge. Kevin was seemingly pretty content in his job. He didn't really talk too much about it outside of work, but when he did, he seemed to be proud of what he had done and seemed to get along with his co-workers. It seemed like he was a decent enough boss. Very professional and closed off, but still fair. He was one of those people who was always tired, but was still always busy. Always busy working, always busy having a thriving social life, always giving heavily calculated amounts of money to charity. Salmon thought that he only gave money to charity for status reasons because the dolphin wouldn't let Salmon stay at his house while Salmon was still couch hopping and trying to find a job to support his new party-going lifestyle. Honestly, no one really knew how Kevin thought or why he made the decisions that he made, or if he was truly happy. He was quiet and practical and unafraid of telling people what he thought, be it good or bad. He brought people together, and everyone needed to go to a hurricane party at least once. Orca and Salmon got into a little disagreement then because Orca didn't go to parties and had no intention of doing something so stupid, and Salmon took offense to that. They professionally came to terms with the fact that they were different people and continued with the interview. This was sort of a strange situation because the mugging wasn't at a hurricane party. It was across town at the after party for an indie rock concert. The band was called Sharkhead. By any indication, this wasn't Hurricane's taste in music, but people surprise you sometimes. It looked like he had come to the party directly from work and was still in a suit, which was entirely too overdressed for the situation, though it was unclear if he actually owned casual clothes. He was clutching a briefcase that was still at the scene of the crime, which was what Salmon and a random unaffiliated bartender had later seen the mugger take the diamond from, after stabbing Hurricane. Salmon hadn't quite understood what was going on and tried to de-escalate the situation. He was very drunk and thought this was just a bar fight. The mugger had punched him in the face and raced away out the nearby back door. It was quite likely that Salmon had accidentally saved Hurricane's life. Oh yeah, and the dolphin had maybe said something about coming there to surprise his girlfriend. His alleged girlfriend was apparently a lionfish mermaid. She was from a faraway city and was one of the only lionfish that Orca had ever met. Pretty much everything that she said to the city guard was a backhanded compliment. She was either nervous about something or didn't really like the guard, or both. Lionfish had a name that no one could pronounce, like Smithlehistle or something, and so everyone just called her Lionfish. She was one of those people who it was incredibly difficult to get a straight answer out of, but insisted that everyone believe her anyway, even though she had no evidence. Lionfish both insisted that she hadn't gone to the party or concert, but seemed to know that the attempted murderer was a swordfish, even though that information wasn't open to the public. They went round and round in circles. A piece of information that she let slip was that both she knew and hated Salmon. Therefore, Orca sought out Salmon for a second interview, this time about what he knew about Lionfish. Salmon didn't know that Lionfish and Hurricane were dating. The guards only knew about it because Lionfish was the only person on the guest list who didn't show up, and when they asked her about it, she hinted that they were indeed dating. And then that they'd never met a couple minutes later. Salmon did say that he wouldn't be surprised because they had seemed to be really getting along at a hurricane party a couple months ago. And shortly after that, the lead singer of Sharkhead, who Lionfish was dating at the time, broke up with her. Hurricane and Lionfish both seemed to be kinder and more relaxed around each other than they were around other people. Lionfish had had a bad run-in with some members of Salmon's old school and thought that he was the same as them, hating everyone who wasn't Salmon. Lionfish hadn't been to any parties or events for a couple of weeks, which was also around the time that she'd gotten into a huge argument with a Moray Eel. Eel had punched a hole in a wall, and if Hurricane hadn't been there, it might have got violent. They were out in the courtyard garden, so no one from inside the house could hear what was going on. It did seem like Lionfish started yelling at both Eel and Hurricane. She seemed like she was scared of Hurricane getting hurt because she kept trying to drag him away from Eel. Hurricane whispered something to her and her expression dropped. She slumped. Eel began laughing. Hurricane started talking to Eel very seriously, and Lionfish drifted away until her back was to the wall, and no one from the windows could see her. Orca then did some research to find out who that eel was. Salmon went to the hotel where he was staying for the night with some spare cash he had made running deliveries for a convenience store earlier that day. It was a trial basis for something that could become a real job eventually. That night, Lionfish knocked on his window. She looked very nervous and like she was trying not to cry. Mermaids almost never cried. Salmon instinctively opened the window before he remembered that they didn't like each other. Lionfish bit her lip and held her hands at her sides in fists to keep them from shaking. Please stop looking into this, and don't tell the guards anything else. She swam off before Salmon could ask any follow-up questions. Salmon did not stop looking into this because he had a problem with authority, and got up early to ask around to see what he could find out about the eel. It seems like no one really wanted to talk about him. Salmon finally did find something out about the eel running a small business for magical recording seashells. He was a block away from the warehouse where he was going to try to ask some of the lower level employees what they knew when he was jumped and thrown into a bag. But he struggled but was stuck in that bag for an uncomfortably long time, and whoever was carrying him refused to talk. When they finally let him out, he was in a mine shaft. They spun the bag around in the water a few times so that he didn't know which way to swim. Joke's on them that he was a salmon, which maybe can sense the magnetic field in order to navigate the ocean, but since he's a merman, then there's probably also something magical involved with metal detection and electromagnetic fields. He was dizzy and disoriented. The eel leapt out of the darkness and pinned into the wall. Salmon temporarily had the breath, or I guess water, that sounds worse, back to breath, knocked out of him. Something cold and knife-like was pressed under his chin. Eel whispered in Salmon's ear, I hear you've been asking about me. He slapped Salmon's shoulder while leaning back. Well, you found me, man. Impressed? Satisfied? Salmon coughed. I'd be more impressed if you brushed your teeth. Eel smiled wider, but his eyes lost all sparkle. Oh yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Great, even. He slammed the hilt of the knife into Salmon's face, breaking his nose without missing a beat. Could you guys do me a favor and get this guy out of my sight for a bit? Please and thank you. They pulled Salmon into a side room and tied his hands behind his back, and also to a hook in the wall. Blood from his nose trailed through the water. One of the thugs patted him on the head. Don't worry, fella, it'll all be over soon. Everything was quiet after that. No thugs, no eel. The water was a bit cold and very still. The bioluminescent lanterns glowed dimly. He skipped lunch and was a bit hungry. Hours passed, and he was half convinced that they just left him there and would never come back, when Lionfish came around the corner. Salmon let out a sigh of relief and started to say something when he realized that she had a black eye. She just stayed there, hovering in the water for a moment, looking at the ground. Salmon waited a minute before tentatively clearing his throat. Lionfish didn't move, but began talking. Kev was going to get me the diamond so that I could give it to Eel. I have a bit of a gambling problem. That swordfish girl came out of nowhere. She shook her head. Salmon leaned forward. Why are you telling me this now? She looked at him with a mostly blank expression, but she was starting to tear up a little. She lifted her hand, gestured at him, tried to say something, and then gave up, letting her arm hang limply at her side. He slowly came to realize what she was trying to say and began laughing nervously. No, it's not going to end like this. It's probably worse than you think, because Eel, he really enjoys that part of the job. Not fun unless He makes it hurt. Salmon gulped and then grit his teeth. Get me out of here. Lionfish's pupils got noticeably smaller, and she swam back a few strokes. No, I can't. You don't know what he'd do to me. I can help. We can go to the guard, and maybe we could do something. It can't be too late. Hurricane, Kevin deserves justice. Please. Lionfish took a deep, shuddering breath and untied him. Meanwhile, Orca kept hitting a metaphorical wall when it came to finding out who Eel was, and instead decided to go to the museum to investigate how Kevin got a hold of the Caracle Tear Diamond. It was incredibly difficult to get an interview set up with the museum, which is why it had taken this long in the investigation to get to this point. She was greeted by an older hammerhead shark lady named Nellie, who barely ever stopped talking. Orca mentally apologized to Salmon because she had previously thought that he was the most annoying person that she'd ever met, but at least he didn't waste her time like this. She didn't need a 30-minute lecture explaining what a caracle was and the history of how merkind knew about the creature given its thoroughly landlocked nature. She also didn't have the heart to keep Nellie on track because she seemed so happy. They finally got on topic, and the shark explained that Hurricane had gotten into trouble as a child with his extreme fascination with shiny things and taking them especially if they didn't belong to him. His parents had channeled this misbehavior into a job at their company where he eventually became the chief financial officer. Scolding and channeling the energy into something lucrative didn't entirely work though, and so they made a deal with the museum that Kevin could occasionally test the museum security. He had earned their trust by always returning the things that he stole and had given fair warning beforehand, though in this case he had done neither of those things. But what was his motive? Orca asked. What was so special about some fancy rock that he needed it to use to impress his alleged girlfriend instead of buying literally anything else? Nellie's smile dropped. An angry shark-based merperson could be a terrifying sight. That fancy rock, so to speak, is the sovereign property of the royal family and the state. After Kevin recovers from his coma, he will likely be found guilty of treason and banished. The mugging isn't the crime you should be investigating. Finding and returning that diamond is the only thing that matters. Orca was mildly taken aback by this because this woman had been talking with such love about her son's wedding earlier in the interview and wasn't expecting her to respond with something so heartless. The fancy rock comment had been strategic to get her off guard. Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, Orca responded, doubling down. I only meant to say that the gem in question has no inherent magical properties. It has next to no historical significance. And it is the least expensive uncut gemstone in the collection, due to both its size, cloudiness, and the commonality of diamonds in the region. Nellie went oddly still. Well, Kevin probably took it because it's small and packetable and because of the significance to his family. In other words, because it was easy. What's the most expensive or outlandish thing he's taken from here while security testing? Nellie drummed her fingers on the case with the remaining diamonds, stirring up more and more bubbles until she slapped the top of the case assertively. If you're going to be like that, I want a lawyer. I suggest you leave. Orca nodded professionally. Okay, we'll continue this later with the lawyer. She took her leave. After she left, Nellie covered her eyes with the palms of her hands. She took a moment to process and then straightened her posture. Her eye twitched with annoyance. Okay, son, you can come out now. Moray Eel came out from behind some fake trees in the dinosaur exhibit. Didn't I ever tell you that how much I love you, Ma? Because that was simply and unequivocally amazing. That piebald brute is just a tad too self-aware for her own good. Thank you, Nellie said dryly. More importantly, it seems our fall guy isn't staying down. You're saying that I should plant the hole on the dolphin. But we worked so hard to get it, though. Yeah, I know. We still have the cash, and the Caracle Tear will be right back here waiting for us. We can always try again. Eel groaned. I was looking forward to this appointment that I had with the snitch and an old trusty here. He brandished his knife at old trusty. His mom gave him a pointed look. I mean, I'll do it. Doesn't mean I'll like it, though. Thank you. Stabby had the best family in the world. She hadn't really had much of a family until she met Moray. She'd been hired as an assassin to take out the first in command of a prominent crime family. He, working at a literal shell company, should have been her first hint that this was the start of something special. She immediately started attacking him with no introduction, and he went along with it, maniacally laughing. The water swirled in the wake of the frantic dance. Property was destroyed and customers ran away screaming. But for that glorious moment, there was only swordfish and eel, a clash of steel, and the cold blood of their wounds merging into the everlasting ocean. Stabby won that fight with Moray in the sand on the floor and her rapier held just above his heart. They were both breathing heavily. Moray smiled at her, and it would have been irresponsible to destroy something so beautiful. They worked together to dispose of the miscreants who tried to get in the way of their destiny. Their screams and blubbering for the mercy that never came were recorded on a shell, which Stabby would play for herself whenever she was having an especially bad day. That was rare until she met Lionfish. After she met Lionfish, she never had a bad day. Lionfish was a very proud person. She never admitted to doing anything wrong, and generally conducted herself as if she was the most unflappable and disinterested creature in the universe. Every time that Stabby asked her to make a wager, Lionfish took it. She never suspected that Stabby might be cheating, and every time she lost, she got more and more frustrated and sad. Of course, Stabby played it off as if she herself was smug, and that Lionfish was just a sore loser, which made Lionfish want to beat her at absolutely anything at this point, which provided this beautiful and poetic loop where Lionfish would lose, get frustrated, and charge headfirst back into that same metaphorical wall at top speed. That started to stop after Lionfish met the most boringly responsible idiot in the world, and fell head over tail in love with Hurricane. Lionfish started trying to pay off her debts instead of accruing more of it, and seemed to finally realize how indebted to Stabby, and to a lesser extent Moray, she actually was. She started to realize how terrifying they could be to those who had wronged them. Moray took advantage of this soon before his and Stabby's wedding and tried to extort some extra spending cash out of Lionfish, but then Hurricane decided to get involved. Moray had asked for a bag full of money dropped off at the Sharkhead concert, since it was all very spur of the moment. The lead singer of Sharkhead, Lionfish's ex-boyfriend, was also Moray's cousin and Nellie's nephew, which is how they all knew each other in the first place, and so it seemed fitting. After the original deal, Moray, Nellie, and Stabby came up with a secondary plan so that they could also steal something from the museum and pin it on Hurricane. A nice little wedding present from Nellie and Stabby to Moray. Nellie took the diamond. They sent a lower-ranking trusted employee to switch out the bags. Everything was going great. Stabby went to the party to pick up the diamond, but Hurricane was starting to get suspicious about something. He suddenly got this need to check what was in the bag. so Stabby stabbed him. She took the diamond out of the bag because Hurricane's paranoia was getting to her. Moray was incredibly happy with his gift. That was until Salmon and Lionfish filed a police report. The Royal Guard investigated the shell company and the mines that night. In all the chaos, Lionfish stole Stabby's shell recordings of the murders mentioned earlier to aid in the police investigation. Salmon used his ability to sense magnetic fields to detect the cash briefcase in the walls of the mines, in a different area to where he had been before. Meanwhile, Orca went to check on Hurricane in the hospital. At the same time, Moray went there to plant the diamond. Orca caught him trying to sneak into the room, and they had an epic fight, which Moray barely escaped from. The whole family fled the city to stay together and ended up in the wilderness without the money or the diamond. They did gain the occasional company of a school of very annoying and strict salmon merpeople. Also not as important to Stabby's story, but Orca didn't get a captain title from this case. She was happy anyway, because she was able to help Dolphin and Lionfish. Hurricane gave Salmon a job planning his events and parties. Salmon asked Orca out and she was like, why not? And I think that that's it for today. I just chose random fish and aquatic animals that I thought would be cool to draw. I don't know if they're fun to draw because I'm going to write and record the script beforehand, recording the script after I drew it, but I wrote the script before. So I don't need to worry about it. I'll see you when I see you, but hopefully it's next week. Bye.